Audiobook Academy Biography presents J.P. Morgan. In the late 1800s, J.P. Morgan built up his fortune and power by creating private banks and consolidating the industrial sector. He was born in 1837 into a wealthy New England family, and began his career in the banking industry in New York City in the late 1850s. J.P. Morgan & Company, the bank he co-founded in 1871, became a major player in the American railroad sector by the 1880s. U.S. Steel and Morgan's efforts to save the U.S. Treasury in 1895 and 1907 made him one of the wealthiest men of his time. At the time of his death, he had amassed an impressive art collection and a thriving business in Rome, which he continued to run well into the 21st century. Early life. On April 17, 1837, in Hartford, Connecticut, a famous New England family welcomed John Pierpont Morgan into the world. Junius Pierpont's father was a successful dry goods entrepreneur and his grandfather founded the Aetna Insurance Company. His maternal grandpa, Joseph Pierpont, was a notable preacher and poet. Pierpont, a frail youngster who suffered from seizures and other unexplained maladies, was confined to his parents' home for long periods of time. In good health, he and his parents went to art galleries and concerts, kindling a lifelong interest in the arts. As he progressed through Boston's English High School, he began to exhibit considerable improvement in his academic performance. Junius Morgan and his family came to London in 1854 to establish a new career as partners in the George Peabody & Company banking firm. For the first time, Pierpont was able to speak fluent French, and he also showed a talent for mathematics when he was sent to the Institut Sillingen, Switzerland. Career and marriages. Duncan, Sherman & Company, the American arm of his father's firm, hired Morgan as a clerk in 1857 after he completed his education. Morgan was in New Orleans on business when he came across a ship captain who had a boatload of coffee on his hands but no one to buy it from. In order to make a profit, Morgan bought the coffee using money from his company and then sold it to local merchants. Emboldened by his success, Pierpont Morgan decided to branch out on his own, forming J. Pierpont Morgan & Company in the early 1860s and working with his father ever since. Mimi Sturgis, the daughter of a wealthy businessman, became close to Morgan through his New York social network. When she was diagnosed with tuberculosis in 1861, it put a crimp in their budding passion, so they married and traveled to Algiers in the hopes of hastening her recovery. Sadly, despite Morgan's greatest efforts, he was unable to save his wife's life. The young businessman was devastated, so he returned to New York and got back to work. In 1864, at his father's encouragement, he formed Dabney, Morgan & Company with senior partner Charles Dabney. By channeling money from abroad into American firms, the Morgans, under Junius' leadership as head of the London banking institution, continued to grow their wealth and influence. Frances Louisa Fanny Tracy, daughter of a New York lawyer, became Pierpont's new girlfriend. They were married in May 1865 and had 4 children, the eldest of whom, John Pierpont Jack Morgan, Jr., would eventually take over his father's firm. Railroad. Morgan teamed up with Philadelphia financier Anthony Drexel in 1871 to form Drexel, Morgan & Company, which moved into a new skyscraper in Lower Manhattan after Dabney's retirement. Morgan's massive stature, piercing eyes, and harsh demeanor were maturing into the outsized figure that would dominate the financial world as he entered his mid-30s. The sale of 250,000 shares of New York Central Railroad stock by William Vanderbilt accelerated Morgan's already successful career in 1879. As a result of the successful deal, Morgan was given a seat on the board of directors of New York Central Railroad. Syndicates led by him sold $40 million in bonds the following year to finance the Northern Pacific Railroad, which was then America's biggest railroad bond deal ever. Morgan organized a conference of the directors of the New York Central and Pennsylvania Railroads aboard his yacht, the Corsair, in 1885 to show his dominance in the industry. Morgan made it clear that the yacht would not return to port until they had achieved a solution that allowed for a level of competition that was acceptable to all parties. The Corsair Compact was eventually reached by the company's executives. Economic empire and government sustainer. When Morgan's father passed away in 1890, his life and profession took a new direction. The merging of Edison General Electric and Thomson Houston Company became General Electric in 1892, following a decade of railroad consolidation. As a result, the lifelong art fanatic began a rapid expansion of an already amazing collection of priceless art. After the Panic of 1893, the full extent of Morgan's authority was revealed. International investors eager to contribute gold for a favorable 30-year bond rate were formed by Morgan in the wake of the depletion of U.S. gold holdings. President Grover Cleveland was suspicious, But he was comforted when the Secretary of the Treasury cited an 1862 law that allowed him the authority to carry out such a transaction without the approval of Congress. During the first months of 1895, the syndicate acquired and resold the bonds, which helped to stabilize the economy. Pierpont reformed his company into J.P. Morgan & Company after Drexel's death in that year. Federal Steel, which it helped fund in 1898, quickly rose to prominence as a significant player in the steel industry thanks to the firm's involvement. For roughly $500 million, Morgan purchased Andrew Carnegie's steel company, which he then merged with his own to become U.S. Steel, the first billion-dollar company in American history. Presidential enemy and supporter. Morgan and James J. Hill formed the Northern Securities Company in 1901 as well. One-third of the country's railroads were under Morgan's control since Northern Securities owned the majority of shares in the Northern Pacific, Great Northern, and CB&Q railroads. Theodore Roosevelt, on the other hand, saw the populist movement as an opportunity to take on the robber barons of Wall Street. According to the Sherman Antitrust Act of 1890, the Justice Department filed a lawsuit against Northern Securities in 1902. In 1904, the Supreme Court ruled in favor of the government after a long legal battle. In spite of this, Morgan continued to wield considerable power in both the business and political arenas. When Panama became an independent state in 1903 and J.P. Morgan & Company was chosen as the fiscal agent, they were responsible for monitoring the transfer of $40 million to the new Panama Canal Company. During the Great Depression of 1907, Morgan was again called upon to help the United States government. In an effort to stop a string of trust banks from collapsing, he invited many bank presidents to his Manhattan library, where he shut the door until a solution could be found, echoing his Corsair meeting of 1885. After a night of fruitless negotiations, Morgan finally broke the impasse by drafting a bailout contract and requiring the presidents, who were at this point weary, to sign it. When the crisis was over, Morgan was already semi-retired and focused much of his work on his art collection and philanthropic endeavors. In 1912, he testified before the Pujo Committee, a congressional probe into Wall Street bankers' cooperation, and returned to the public eye. Death. After the proceedings, Morgan departed for an overseas voyage, but his health deteriorated and he died in a Rome hotel on March 31, 1913. On the day of his funeral, the New York Stock Exchange was shut down until noon. The financial industry was forever changed by Morgan's incredible success, and he left behind a significant legacy. Despite his ability to save the U.S. Treasury twice, many were skeptical, leading to the establishment of the Federal Reserve System in late 1913. J.P. Morgan Chase & Company, the huge multinational banking corporation he founded, was renamed J.P. Morgan Chase & Company. At the beginning of the 21st century. In addition, he left behind a personal art collection that could compete with any king's. The Morgan Library and Museum, housed in his beautiful library, was open to the public in the 1920s thanks to the efforts of Jack Morgan. Thank you for listening in Audiobook Academy. Don't forget to subscribe and smash that like button for more content like this. See you in next video.